Morning all. There was a really mega exciting game in the final game of the SuperFinal. Komodo playing white against Stockfish, the TCEC computer chess SuperFinal. In a way, it's the unofficial world championship for computers. So Komodo had already lost the match by this stage, but rules of the match indicate that all games to be played regardless, so it was playing basically for pride. It kicked off with e4. The opening was the same as the previous game, and the previous game was a very exciting King's Gambit. So we have a King's Gambit, takes knight f3, and the variation with bishop e7. So this is a very dangerous variation for white because of this bishop h4 check, dislodging white's king safety. The king has often been forced to move. The move h4, which I might have played in blitz, is not meant to be at all good here actually. It's meant to be a clear advantage immediately to black. So a preventive measure like that is not particularly good. I'll add on my own blitzer. Black can just use that weakened g4 square, for example, or even put the knight here, and there's huge weaknesses in black's even holding on to the pawn. So that's not a way of playing the position. No, white has to be daring here. The two main moves are bishop c4 and knight c3, positively inviting the check, the dreaded check on h4. So is this a double-edged sword, this bishop h4 check? Okay, it moves the king, but the bishop needs to extricate itself back. It needs to lose time, and white potentially can put immediate pressure soon on f4. But for the moment, king e2 is needed. And now black plays d6. White plays d4, hitting the f4 pawn, and now bishop g4 is played, letting f4 go. Black has done some damage to white's king safety, it would seem. The first world chess champion, William Steinitz, often played like this early in his career before he became more positional. And he is quoted as saying something like, the king is a fighting piece, use it. So here, definitely the king's a fighting piece. But also white's centre potentially is better than black's central control. So bishop takes f4, and now black plays knight c6. It seems very logical to put more pressure on d4. Queen d3 now is played. A very good move, supporting the centre, not minding any annoyance like knight b4. That can just be queen b5 or queen c4 is okay here. Black dare not do something like this. Check, winning the knight. So there's no nuisance move here for queen d3 right now. Black played knight ge7, and here is where white slightly improves king safety with king d2. So getting out of the pin as well. And so this bishop actually is now attacked. Now in the previous game, in game 63, knight g6 was played by Komodo, and knight g6 enables the bishop to come back. So, but in this game, the move bishop f6 is played, slightly provocative because it seems to walk into e5, which looks to be quite interesting for white. However, e5 surely carries with it a weakness of the last move, that the light squares are weakened, and in fact surely black has bishop f5 kicking the queen. So quite a provocative move here. Nevertheless, white did actually play e5, so it looks as though the light squares are slightly weakened. So let's see what's going on here. Well, first of all, let's look at d takes e5. If that was played, then d takes e5, queen takes d3, for example. This position here is good for white. e5 is protected for the moment. If bishop takes f3, e takes, and two pieces are attacked. So that is no good for black. So let's rule that out. Another possibility is bishop takes e5, so that after d takes, bishop f5, and this looks dangerous for exposing white's king. For example, in this position, if queen e3, then black is getting material back with advantage with the check, which is, the king's on d2. It's very dangerous, and black would be clearly better here. So, but on bishop takes e5, white can play something quite similar to the game. In fact, white can actually play, after d takes bishop f5, an idea similar to the game, which is to give up the queen brilliantly with e takes d6. So the queen could be given up here for 3 minor pieces after bishop takes d3, d takes e7, hitting the queen so there's no discovered check. And this position, on my Houdini, which is running on my hardware, initially this is given as a slight advantage to black. And this is a very interesting thing about this whole game, in fact. It's how computers assess the queen versus 3 minor pieces and a pawn, and king safety, which could be improving, and team coordination of pieces, which could be improving. So there's potential, and it's that potential which maybe computers struggle with understanding the potential of the potential. I think there was a Superman film where the computer struggled to defend itself against this attack made on it, this kind of violently aggressive acid attack, and the computer was in meltdown. So sometimes, even in films, it's portrayed that the computer cannot understand potentials here. So there's 2 potentials going on. In this position, in my analysis here, white can actually get soon an equal position through some very, very delicate king moves to slightly improve king safety and start improving piece coordination. This is just an example variation. And here, white can even be slightly better now. You see, as the pieces centralise, the potential for white is revealed. Now, in the game continuation here, bishop takes e5 wasn't tested. In fact, just bishop f5. And we have a similar, very, very dangerous scenario now. This is virtually forced. If the queen moves off this e file, then it's end of game, basically. D takes e5 is end of game. A very, very nasty pin. White is collapsing. So the queen sacrifice is absolutely forced here. So we have this continuation now. E takes f6. What a fantastic continuation for the final game of this match. So a queen sacrifice, in inverted commas, but getting 3 pieces for it. So purists would argue it's not really a queen sacrifice, but it's still pretty spectacular material imbalances to have in a game, especially from a king's gambit, reflecting the romantic era of chess. So bishop takes d3, f takes e7, hitting the queen, queen d7, bishop takes d3. So an interesting scenario, a little bit similar to before in some respects, at least the material balance. So can the white pieces coordinate? Is the potential of the white pieces good? Is the potential king safety good for the king to be safer? Let's see. Black played knight takes e7 here. Black wants to castle. That pawn was stopping the king legally castling. Rook a f1. The rook seizes what potentially is a good file here, with a pawn to attack on f7. Castles. King c1, the king is improving its king safety. At this stage, my Houdini assesses this as slightly better for black here. So about less than half a pawn better for black at this point. So can white coordinate the 3 pieces against the queen? a6. Now white plays h4, and this reveals that maybe knight g5 is potentially on the cards, or h5, h6. This would provoke weaknesses on the dark squares if g6 is ever played, and this bishop could use those weaknesses in particular. b5 is played, and now we see actually h5. That's the idea, to try and create some weaknesses around black's king. Black plays b4, and the knight for the moment goes back. It can always re-centralize later. It doesn't mind going back. Knight d5 hitting the bishop drops back. Doesn't matter, these are short-term threats. a5, but this looks like a menacing idea to weaken white's king. White now plays though knight h4, and you can see piece coordination is revealed here via the f5 square, all coordinating on f5. The f5 square is one of Kasparov's favourite places for an aggressive knight near the opponent's king. So not only piece coordination, but piece coordination directed at the opponent's king safety. c6 is played, and now knight f5 is lucrative here according to my Houdini, but in fact rook f3 is played. The rook can also perhaps join in here. So there's ideas like rook g3 as well, looking at g7. Knight c7, and now knight f5, and it looks as though there are very interesting ideas now, like rook g3, the other knight coming in, bishop f4 to hit d6, and here the evaluation for my Houdini is now less optimistic for black. It's slightly less optimistic for black. Knight e6 is played, and now a very, very interesting move indeed here. White's knights really want to have nice central squares. Can you guess what white played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, you might want to pause the video. Okay, white played d5, a temporary pawn sacrifice. If knight c5, if it's not taken, knight c5, then d takes c6, and that's very horrible for knight e7s. So the queen can't take that because of knight e7, forking king and queen. So that would be very unpleasant. So it's taken, this pawn sack is taken, and now knight de3, just heading for that lovely d5 square. That's a fantastic square for the knight. And with this knight on f5, there's no queen c6 all the time because of knight e7. So knight c5, and now white doesn't mind losing the bishop. Knight takes d5. So simplifying a bit, knight takes d3, rook takes d3. But look at these knights. They take care of both. They both take care of each other because of that e7 square. So if queen takes f5 here, knight e7 check, winning the queen. And this looks like a very beautiful knight on d5. And it's at this point Houdini has now changed its mind. Visually it's apparent to us humans that this is looking quite dangerous for black now, these three pieces. And from an engine point of view, it's now slightly better for black, half a pawn. Sorry, slightly better for white, half a pawn advantage. So over the last few moves after this pawn sack, this has really changed the mind of the engines. Was there anything better here at all? Not really. On d4, then knight d5 again, it doesn't matter that black would have that extra pawn. This is still a good position for white. This is still dangerous. In fact, in this position, this is almost reaching an immediate +3 after check here, and the amazing knight g6 check. White's coordination is already very dangerous in this position. So for example, takes h6, bishop takes h6. You see white is crashing through here after taking rook here. This is a very, very dangerous attack. It seems to be winning for white. So this is a well-conceived pawn sacrifice. So black just allowed white to get that pawn back here for this position. So now after rook a e8, white now played rook f1, so building up the pressure. Also tempting is knight f6 here. This might not be as clear. I'm assuming that the engines here are running on much more powerful hardware than my machine, but this variation is prompted by my Houdini. And okay, it's slightly better for white, it seems, but it was rejected. So there's much more tension and juiciness for what was elected here instead of that, which was just rook f1. So the tension is kept. f6, and now h6, trying to do damage to black's king safety. g6, the knight drops back, and now black plays f5. So we've got lots of pieces on the board here compared to that variation. Knight c4, so threatening that a5 pawn. That could be on the cards, or just playing b3, fixing things. Black plays now f4, not bothering to defend. How could that pawn be defended anyway? If rook a8, then simply knight b6, forks queen on rook. So f4 was played, and now white takes that. Rook takes f4, bishop takes. At least black gets this active looking check. King d2, the rook drops back. The threat was clearly knight f6 check, forking queen and king. b3 now, starting to fix black's pawns. I think it would be far too dangerous to take on a5 here. I think this loses immediately to queen a7 in this particular position. Seems to be looking at the f2 square, so queen f2, and this would be the end of white. So white has to be very careful here. So b3 was played, queen d8, and now white improves gradually king safety with this tucking away move, king c1. Just tucking the king now on b2 seems like a great idea in principle. g5 was played, rook g3, rook g6, bishop drops back, king f7. White's pieces seem to be coordinating now. Check, king e6, knight cb6, protecting that great knight on d5 for the moment. Letting h6 go here, rook takes h6. Does that help black really? Now another mighty centralization from white, bishop d4. So look at these pieces in the center coordinating, and the rook is ready to help out here. g4 is played, and the rook just drops black back. Queen h4, knight c7 check, king drops back, and now white improves king safety again with king b2. Look at that wonderful bishop in the center. Look at the knights using that d5 square, and the rook on a lovely file here. Queen g5, and now white actually plays a4, so freezing that a5 pawn and encouraging the en passant. If the en passant isn't played, white can continue anyway with check and maybe get this in the future. The en passant is played, king takes a3. Does it matter the king is out at the moment? The queen and rook don't seem to be have any relevance for white's king safety. Queen g6, c4 now is possible. That was the important pawn to be able to play without the en passant. It supports the d5 square, so this is looking very strong. This kind of check here, very dangerous for black's king safety. a4 is played. This looks like desperation. The rules of the match here, that is, even if both engines agree it's like more than +5, it actually needs to be more than +6.5 for 8 half moves. That's 4 full moves, and then the game will be resigned. So that's why some of these games seem to be quite long and arduous, but in fact often they were decided much earlier. But here, how long can black last in this position? White piece coordination is rapidly increasing here. Knight cd5 check, king e8. This is one of the lesser evil moves here already. We're talking about lesser evil moves. If king e6, apparently this is like +11 after knight f4 check, of course, forking queen and king, of course, so that's not possible. And if king d8, then rook f8 check. So already black's king is in mortal danger, and the queen, the queen would have to be lost here. So king e8, dragging things out, but for how long? Check. Now in this position, a rook could come to the 7th rank on king f7. Rook e7 check, for example, king g8, knight d7 is very strong. Look at that f6 square. So black thought the lesser evil move was king d8, and now rook e7 was played. White is now threatening all sorts of things. It's unstoppable coordination. Queen d3 with the idea of queen takes b3 mate, but white spots that, of course. Bishop c3 parrying that mate threat, and now white is threatening simply something like rook g7 to have the option of rook g8. That is very, very dangerous because the knights are controlling all the key squares for the king to move to here. These two knights. So all it needs is rook g7. This position, now both engines were agreeing it was like more than +6.5 for so many moves. So in fact, Stockfish lost this battle and resigned here, but won the war by winning the SuperFinal overall over these 64 games. So why did black resign? Well, rook g7, how can it actually be stopped? If we look at rook g6, for example, rook takes h7, and this is unbearable, this threat. If rook g8, then check. Doesn't matter about the mate threat for the moment. Check, and it'll be mate's next move. whatever happens, knight d7 will be checkmate. Or if king d8, just here is discover check, or discover check here, or discover check here. This is all mate. So let's go back to this final position. It's absolutely hopeless for black after this simple bishop c3. So rook g6, rook takes h7 is sufficient. Also king takes a4, and black is not going anywhere. It's still absolutely winning. So a fantastic game there with an amazing King's Gambit continuation opening being tested here. And it seems, so white's move choice here, knight c3 from the human opening book instead of bishop c4, allowing this check, which is meant to be, according to my live book, this is meant to be slightly better for black. So it's interesting, if arguably one of the strongest computers in the world can lose this position with black, was Steinitz right about this, that this position, this sort of position, might actually be good for white? It looks like romantic era stuff, but there's evidence from this game that white has some dynamic compensation here. I would argue that if white can sort out the king's safety issues gradually and carefully, like in this game, then white's got the trump card of better central control, and that was demonstrated here. White's better central control. So a delicate move, queen d3 and then king d2, and okay, a queen sacrifice was absolutely needed here because of that position of the king on the d file. This was absolutely essential to sacrifice the queen for 3 minor pieces. But again, you know, the 3 minor pieces, white sorts out more of the king's safety issue and starts coordinating the 3 minor pieces, and this led to a position that black is just being gradually broken down there. Now the knight couldn't have been taken as a knight e7, and the coordination of the white pieces just became more and more until it was unbearable. So the counterplay just became less and less, and a mating net was woven basically around the black king here. When the rook entered the 7th rank, it became now apparent that this is it. Both engines agree this is total disaster for black. I hope you enjoyed that game. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.